Hey, everybody. It sounds like there might be a few of us that we can all share video and sound. I don't know. I see people are joining as well, but it sounds like our numbers might be small enough we can all collaborate at the same time in this discussion. Does anyone know if we already have a designated facilitator?
Hi.
Hi, Lee. I think we're all getting settled. I was going to say, it sounds like our numbers might be small enough that we can all share video and audio. But I wasn't sure if you had a designated facilitator already or if it's going to be free-form.
Free-formed. Are you Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina. Sorry for all the chats. Hope it's helpful.
It always is.
It was funny at the end of the last plenary, everyone's like, you know, there was another BoF at the same time. I'm like, of course it was the same time. So I'm so happy to be here at this time.
We did know about that BoF, but I don't think we had the opportunity to reach out yet. Were you part of that?
Yeah, so I was the lead on that one.
Okay.
With Cameron Nealon. We put it together because we've been working on the data trust side kind of by day. So these questions of where we may have shared interests and where other networks are grappling with the same issues was something near and dear, because I know, we're struggling right now with design mechanisms, and I'll drop a paper in here. Is a wonderful paper working from, but how to help with some of the issues that perhaps aren't the people networking or the technical side, but I would say the administrative side of things. So how to streamline the legal process and the data transfer agreements and data use agreements, which is really, in some ways, I would say harder almost than the technical challenges we face. And so those are the things that kind of prompted us to put together that other BoF. And I'll drop the link to one of the papers we're looking at just in the chat here in a moment.
Yeah,
and it was data stewardship, right? But it was like collective data stewardship, kind of.
So I'm also co-chairing an interest group through the RDA, and we had our session earlier this morning on professionalizing data stewardship. So from the perspective of building a body of knowledge set of requirements for data stewards, who are we? What are our organizational structures? How do we make a business case within institutions for data stewards? That work is happening in another RDA interest group right now.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Please do share that paper. We're working on trying to build out a national repository for sharing sensitive or restricted use data. And obviously data access agreements and sort of shared policy is a huge part of that. Perhaps more so even than the technical side. And we're just now kind of at the cusp of trying to tackle that problem nationally by bringing together different representatives from research administration, research ethics boards, and we're thinking it's going to be like a hackathon kind of a model where we bring in these stakeholders and try to collaboratively write out aspects of this policy over the course of several months. So whatever you're able to share on that effort, I think will be helpful.
And I'm happy to follow up offline, as people talk about where things might go with an interest group. And this came up in the data stewardship conversation earlier, but there may be room for an interest group specifically on this, building on the legal interoperability work that's happened in the RDA previously, but specific to data collaboratives, because I think that everyone's working with the same groups of stakeholders to try to navigate what these terms need to be ethical, to be fair. And I think there's a lot of parallel conversations there. So I'll just footnote that might be another potential interest group.
Yeah, I will say, like, with regards to data use agreements, just to follow up with that conversation. So I'm the director of Scholars and Scholarship at the Association of Research Libraries, and data use agreements for institutions and how to implement them is a key priority for us to tackle this year. So please do share that as well with me. Okay, so I'm gonna copy what our note taker, Erin, who's really good, has. So we have all these priorities that were surfaced from the last BoF, and I'm curious how we can go about kind of prioritizing them. If anybody has any suggestions, or I can share my screen too, if that would be helpful.
I think that would be helpful so we don't have to switch back and forth. Or not, because it's so tiny.
Is it tiny? I'll turn off my camera.
Expand it if you click on
Yes,
it.
that's true.
Yeah, that's great. It does work, but then it hides the rest of us. But
Oh, minimize screen.
yeah,
That's easier than switching between tabs.
I think it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, so do you want me to read them then?
That would be great.
Maybe, yeah. they're still small.
Cool. So what makes data networks unique in comparison with other networks? Equity, how the network works, sustainability, engagement, barriers/challenges, how the different focus, sorry if you hear a child laughing in the background, how the different focus of the network changes with concerns, how different contexts impact the administration of the networks, geography, level of focus, so institutional, interinstitutional, national, network governance, or network structure governance, maturity, membership models, and flexibility.
Sounds like a construction project.
Yeah, some background noise.
Hi, how are you? Okay. So I'd be curious to hear from everybody as we think about potentially creating some kind of interest group around data networks. I will say, like, after the RDA BoF, we had a couple of other meetings, and the administrative side of things was actually what interested people most. And so when we get to like the draft of the interest group, you'll see that reflected quite a bit. But I'm curious to hear from all of you, what of these areas is kind of interest, what should we maybe not try to tackle as like best practices or guidelines or help documentation?
I have kind of a suggestion based on, because I had watched and rewatched the video from the last time and went over all of our notes, and something I just see that keeps coming up over and over again is to try to work out that structure so that there is equity between partners, and also along with that to work on communication modes, that can be such a huge problem. And I see that in different ways from the feedback that we've gotten already, that it can be things like, introversion versus extroversion that might be obvious to all of us. But then it's also things like different languages. And Yasuyuki had brought that up last time in his project in Japan, that there were so many international resources that could be used that were in English, but there were few of them that were able to speak and communicate in English, and that created a barrier in itself. And having to translate those things then into Japanese, which they did with a number of resources. And Lee, you might speak to that too, because I know that with Portage, you've had to put things both in English and French.
Absolutely. So everything we do that's national facing in Canada has to be both official languages. So that's documents, resources, but it's also all of our national services need to be 100% bilingual, which is, it just poses some additional resource challenges. And you have to think about that when you're staffing up, and also need to think about that when you're bringing together working groups to make sure that you have, representation from across the country, including French language representation. So absolutely.
So Leandro, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, you're primarily interested.
Hello.
from the perspective of federated data repositories. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm still trying to understand if I'm entering the right party. Okay, and my maturity level might be behind yours. Okay, because I'm still working to create a national data, if I can call it like that. So we are kind of creating a federation of repositories, putting together some funding agencies and universities and research institutions. Like I start with around 10, okay? And I'm mostly interested in discussing like sustainability issues, governance, and the network structure.
I think you're at the right party. I was going to say
Okay,
that's the
thank you.
exact same. That's the exact same thing we're struggling with too. I'll just note. So I, by day, I'm a program officer for a nascent open access ebook usage data trust. So we're trying to facilitate the exchange, aggregation, and benchmarking of usage data for open access books. So if you think of the repositories, any online hosting platforms, as well as publishers and libraries, everyone has a stake, and we're trying to amass and share that data and facilitate that sharing. And so the exact same challenges you're describing around making sure we have the right stakeholder governance models, a sustainable financial model to support not only those providing the data in, but also to support all the activity that happens in the middle is something that we're actively working through right now. I will footnote another area that I'm trying to track. So my background is tech policy, but because we're doing this at a global scale, one of the challenges that we're trying to work through is how do we support that global federated network, recognizing that there are regional efforts like Open Air in Europe. Here in the US, we don't really have something yet, but trying to figure out how to overlay this global exchange, recognizing that we have both regional and national policies around that data exchange that we need to factor in, not even getting into the privacy and security level, which of course is relevant as well.
Hi all. I'm not sure if I got the time zone wrong, but it is 22 minutes past now. For me, it's 22 past 2 in the afternoon. So then I'm getting a bit confused. But is that me calling you back to the main room now? Yes.
No, I think it looks like the other group is still working too. I'm just curious, what did we get to? Like equity, communication modes, the importance of local context, I think, seem to be key considerations. Okay. All right. Thank you, Alex. How do we go back?
So you see just below where it says breakout.
Oh, back to BoF. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Christina, will you report out? Please. I'm tired of talking. I can't hear you though, but if you say no, it's
Mute.
okay.
Yeah.
Please jump in. I'm happy to give it my best. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's so dark in here.
I need some lights.
Because, well, I think you know, because you've been in here, that
It's Jennifer.
one of the rooms doesn't have a light, which is the room I'm in. It's the room behind me has a light.
Oh, I mean, she brought up really good points. There's all these resources that are already out there.
But are these resources necessarily reaching the audiences? I mean, particularly I was thinking with training, that I know that the training that we've provided was only available to a limited number of people, and only within a limited geographic region, but we did have some applicants from other places in the world, and unfortunately we weren't able to facilitate them coming to the United States to be in our workshop. So a network of networks, at least as far as something like DC in education might be concerned, might be a way that we can share some of our resources with others and kind of spread that ability to train others more broadly.
Yeah, having a place to aggregate training resources together so that they're easily discoverable, like in the context of, a network of networks portal or something, would be really interesting.
I think the challenge always comes back to sustainability. And so I'll footnote also in the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group, there is we use Slack, and we have a very active Slack channel on training where people are doing exactly this. They're sharing upcoming trainings, previous trainings, training resources. And so this might be one of those opportunities where for those interested in the training of data stewards and curators, that there potentially could be a meeting behind the scenes after this plenary with those in that group to see if maybe there's something that could come out of that. I have 3 areas I wanted to raise that I haven't seen other folks working on yet, and I'm really looking for peers to collaborate with. One is on the sustainability issue. So how these data networks, how we think about sustainability, especially when a lot of the cultural institutions that we're working with in the United States, for example, have budget constraints and constraining budgets at that, where we see them shrinking. And a lot of the membership models to date may not be resilient over the next few years. So I don't know if others are grappling with sustainability models, but I know that's an area I'd love to hear from others. The other 2 domains where I think there may be an area for the interest group or a network of networks, one is around efficiency and process. How do we streamline those processes to make data ingest and getting partners onboarded? How do we make that more efficient? How do we, this kind of isn't so much about the data curator training, but more about the relationships and communications between partners. And along the lines of that, I think a related piece is legal and ethics. So we know, I'm sure all of us have seen, the regulations come and then we adapt. But right now, the technology, especially as we're linking a lot of this data, is past where the regulation is and where the protections are. And so I know something that our data trust is starting to think about are what are the ethical principles that need to sit behind our network. And I don't know if other networks are thinking about that too, but as we're federating and linking data and looking to share that out, do we need to put some guidelines up around the ethical use of that data, especially when it comes to tying it back to scholars?
Yeah, the ethics. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I understood that we should discuss also what's the motivation, right, to join a network, data networks, based on the slides, and also touching on the sustainability issues. Well, what would motivate, let's say, my national network to join a bigger network of networks, perhaps to have access to best practice, to save time, and also perhaps to have some let's say economy of scale, like sharing. I just watched it before in a meeting, some people discussing how to share infrastructure between repositories, or perhaps we can like have one people hired to work with many repositories at the same time. So these questions of that we gain on economy of scale by working together and saving some money. Like having shared resources, even human resources or infrastructure resources.
Has my mic been on all this time? Like, have you heard my kids playing and stuff? Okay, this platform is like new to me. I want to just circle back to ethics for a second. I'm a part of a network that we were really, concerned with getting voices of people who would be affected by ethical questions involved, and we really, really struggled to make those connections, and even just to have the expertise. The expertise just wasn't within our community that we needed, and so I think making that a key place that we're looking for experts to connect, leveraging the skills of others, pulling them in, because I just think, at least from my experience, it's very lacking.
I'm wondering, how do some of these things play out internationally, though? If you think of a network of networks, you're going to have very different needs globally. And, I totally agree with what Jennifer said about needing those resources, particularly right now within the United States, for those of us to be able to share and to find experts to help us with the problems that we have here. But those same problems might be different, let's say, in China or Russia or Europe, or in all kinds of different places. So what are maybe some common things that that would be more global rather than local, and then what could be pulled down locally?
Something in particular I was wondering is if we might be able to work together, and this might turn into a working group, but having a working group to model data transfer and use agreement language that specifically for the data we're sharing. I think if we could come up with model language that works within the RDA community, that would help with a lot of the multi-party agreements that we have to navigate.
Yeah, I think that would be really useful. Like, it will change across jurisdictions and depending on what your funders or regulators or legal requirements are, but there will be common elements. And I think having those as a template, as a starting point, would be excellent.
A DMP template, except just for the data transfer and use stuff.
That would be huge. I will say some other group that's working in this space that I probably, there's a slide about it later. I don't know if we'll actually get to it. So at RDA in Philly, back in, it was when we're still meeting in person, in April of 2019, there was an NSF funded network of networks workshop that took place for 2 days. And the white paper is just now coming out of it, but it outlines some of the key challenges when you're trying to facilitate actually international collaboration. So that's it. There's some things we may be able to borrow within that as well, but definitely legal interoperability, data use agreements, communication. All of those things came up as sort of key considerations when trying to do this work as well. JM, do you want to talk a little bit about Indigenous sovereignty?
I mean, part of the ethical stuff we were looking at was trying to get information or get voices to talk about Indigenous peoples' input onto access and digitization of things that may have been and it found themselves in the care of institutions. There are the problem is well, there are a lot of problems, but it's like, getting input and that is monolithic, because Indigenous communities all may have very different approaches or beliefs or practices. And, for us, the problem that we really faced again was like none of us that were working on this project, which this was based around writing stuff for 3D data preservation, have any connection to Indigenous communities. So we didn't feel comfortable trying to write anything about it. And but then we felt like we really piece of what we were doing. I feel like I'm losing the thread here, but that's my overall thought.
You make me think of something that I know I've struggled with. So I have a privacy professional background as well, and I keep finding myself wondering how we build better bridges to these other communities outside of research data. And so whether it's with the Indigenous community that holds that knowledge as the primary source, the example I would give is the privacy community. Those who work as chief privacy officers have a set of global expertise that can apply to research data, but they're used to thinking about it in data writ large. And I don't know how we build stronger relationships to that group, or the people who are doing ethics by design and privacy by design, because they're out there, and finding ways to build better bridges and to facilitate the communication and relationships between those of us who are administering these data networks and those communities. I don't know what that is, but I feel like there might be something there.
But I do also want to mention, those are really good, but I do also want to mention Indigenous data sovereignty isn't just about, that there's other people who may have traditional knowledge. It's also about people who have traditional knowledge being a part of research and having their own. So when we're reaching out like that, we should be reaching out to people who, we need to feel that they're on our level. We need to not be like, we're going to handle your information if you tell us how. It's more like, you can handle your information. We want to invite you to be able to do so. So that's just maybe a little bit of a difference. And then I also wanted to mention to Jennifer, I have some contacts in WashU anthropology that might have some people you could talk to locally regarding, at least if you're looking at things around Missouri. Jennifer and I are both from around there, around Missouri.
We did talk to one person from the anthropology department, which just made us feel like maybe we knew, we didn't get us closer to our goal, just made us have a lot more questions. So, I mean, it was good. It really guided us, but it was like, okay, we basically decided we couldn't talk about this at all at this point.
Right. Like if you can't do it appropriately, how do you kind of grapple with that too? We need to go back to the bigger room now. We only surprisingly have 21 minutes left in our session. So thanks for the fabulous conversation. Alex, I see you popping in and out.
Yep.
All right.
Your kind reminder. See you back in the main room.
Hi again.
Hello again.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was awesome. I can't wait till we're back in person and, you can buy people coffees and maybe alcoholic beverages if that's you're okay with that, because that would make this much better. Anyway, I think once I meet with everybody, it may be really, really bad. I owe people lots, and we lost Lee. Okay. Cool. Fabulous Padlet. Do you want us to brainstorm these, or can you add them? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let's brainstorm. Let's talk about them and then just add things as we're talking. Do we want to go column by column, or just thoughts that have already come to us?
Column by column.
Okay. So has everybody had a chance to kind of look at the proposal a little bit? So what is working about the proposal? What's clear? Is the purpose clear? Is it full enough? And let me say what I mean by purpose, because it's a long. Tried to tidy it up a little.
Hi, Theo.
It's my coworker. Let's see. So the proposed interest group, an introduction, it says the introduce will address the associated challenges of using a network, and leverage expertise around resources, best practices, approaches to building. Any thoughts on that? Should we just move on to the number 3, the user scenarios?
I'll just make one footnote, I think, on the focus, something that I'm still trying to zero in on. If the focus is really for people, are we talking about how do we support the data curators and the staff? Or is it more at a, for those of us who are administering data networks, is this really helping those of us who are administrators think about sustainability and financials and kind of streamlining operations at a higher level? And teasing those out, they may be 2 different interest groups because the audience is very different. So
I think that's kind of what we
that's really what we came. Oh, sorry, Hannah.
I think that's what the conclusion that we came to so far anyway, and why we kind of decided to have this second birds of a feather meeting, is we were still trying to decide if those things were together or, like you said, if they would be a separate interest group potentially.
To just make sure that all of you know, it might be worth having you join the next co-chairs meeting for the professionalizing data stewardship interest group, because I think in that group, they're really looking at how to support those who are supporting the stewards themselves. And so that's really about training and making the case in the institution for a data steward and curator. And so it's a more of the person on the ground focus, where what I was hoping from this group and what I haven't seen in the RDA, that administrative support network.
I mean, I do think that's kind of the way that we were thinking of scoping it. I don't know if the others want to chime in on that, but it did seem to me that we weren't trying to go so individual with this, that we were trying to look at it as networks, but we were wanting it to be open to people who might not even have a network yet. For instance, the Dutch coordination point is currently more of a theoretical network, and then Yasuyuki's network in Japan is. So we might think of different maturity in that way. It's still a network to network. As far as like how practices might come in, I think we're kind of looking at it as leveraging the various expertise that we have, maybe to work on good or better practices.
I don't know if we're moving to the other columns, but something that I'm going to try to stick up there on thoughts under focus is whether it makes sense to call out things beyond curation. I think right now curation comes through very strongly in the document as a core focus, at the expense of sustainability, at the expense of kind of interoperability and all of these other topics we've been talking about. And so it might be worth to either introduce the other topics or to reduce the focus on curation.
Yeah, I think when we drafted it, definitely some of the other networks are not focusing exclusively on curation, and we want to be more inclusive to other needs with regards to networks and support around other areas of research data. So the data discovery collaboratory is actually almost entirely focused on the discovery of data, no matter where it sits. And so they have a very different, I mean, it's still a network of organizations and institutions, and they definitely have an interest here. So thank you. That's really helpful.
So just to go back to the doc for a sec, so we've looked, let's just to get this what's clear part in, is the user scenario or case study section, does that seem clear? Improvement.
I'll footnote two other terms I've seen for data networks coming up. Data institutions, which is what the Open Data Institute calls them, as well as data collaboratives. Either of those might be alternatives you want to note in here. Data spaces is the other one that the EU is shifting towards.
Did I just sneeze on air? Sorry about that.
It's okay. So that was scenarios. Okay, how about objectives? Let's look at the objective section. And let's feel free to talk about any column when we're looking at these sections. I think it makes sense to kind of whatever is coming to us when we're in a section.
If I may, really quick, on the section above with the use cases, you talk about engaging in inclusive environments, and sometimes that creates tensions. So thinking about what those frameworks are and defining it, you might want to clarify the word environment here, because I know, for example, I deal with people on the open data side, and then we have proprietary corporate research folks too. And so finding that middle ground that spans both is important in our case.
I'm not sure I got all of that, but I'm putting the engage in inclusive environments, define what we mean by environment. What were the two things you said? Maybe, don't worry, it's okay. Other things about
comment.
Okay, other things about the objective section?
I think just it's been already kind of said before in that you know, do we want to go administrative with this, or do we want to go with best practices, and can we balance both of them? Just maybe something to consider, to think about more. And then we could probably add we could probably flesh this section out and have it focus less on, sorry, I think this is a double I under best practice, under objectives, and I can insert a comment.
As far as best practices, I wonder if the group might just be used, you know, sort of like a secondary thing, just as a matter of networking, similar to how right now Data Creation Network and Portage are communicating to see where we have maybe common things that we can do on the side. And maybe there's other networks that would benefit from that. And if we just had a little space, at least in this carved out, that maybe some of the networks that are more mature can maybe at least share out some of those things with networks that are newer, because I know that I've heard from Marianne that having that information is very important to them, and you know, to try to keep it coming if we can.
Let's move on, just for the sake of time, to the outcome section and review that. I don't think we need to necessarily review participants. People can just add that to the last column.
Jennifer,
or unless you can think of people we should be reaching out to. Go ahead, Cynthia.
All I was gonna add is like our session is over in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Do we want to like bring people together to just thank them with like 2 minutes left? or
Sure,
1
yeah.
minute left?
Let's go back.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
That's okay.
I
A
wonder.
lot of good things happened in this session.
I'll
Thank,
call Group A back.
thank you.
Cynthia, I wonder, should we add core?
Should we what?
Should we add core? You were saying people to reach out to and potentially
Core.
add
Yeah,
core.
definitely.
I think we have to figure out how to get back now, I think. Okay, it's scroll down and back to BoF.